Menscape, the podcast with Carl.J. Ashley, and proudly sponsored by the Functional Naturopathic Clinic.
Hi everybody, welcome to this month's edition of Menscape, the podcast, sponsored by the Functional Naturopathic Clinic. And today's guest is Vince Cullen. Good morning here, good afternoon where you are, Vince. How are things?
Good afternoon. They're good. Hot.
Hot and sticky?
Very, very sticky. You don't take your clothes off, you peel them off. It's the most uncomfortable situation. But after 3 weeks now, I'm sort of getting used to it. And where I am in I think they pronounce it Hui, in sort of the middle of the country. It's a little bit cooler. It's a good 8 degrees cooler to where I've just been in Da Nang and Hoi An. So it's actually cooler here, but I'm still peeling the clothes off me.
Humidity.
Absolutely, yeah. It hasn't rained so far today. Like the 3 days I've been here, it just rained and rained and rained. I have a plastic poncho that I got at WOMAD some years ago, at the WOMAD festival, and it's still serving me in very good
It's stood the test of time.
It has. Thank goodness for WOMAD. So new cultures, new sights, new sounds, new smells, new tastes, new experiences, and not all of them pleasant, because that's the nature of sight, sounds, tastes, touch, and experiences.
Yeah. So for the benefit of the audience, you're currently in Vietnam and en route to Thailand.
Right.
And I'm going to ask you to explain a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Oh, right, okay. Well, my name is Vince Cullen, and we might get onto identities and personalities and self.
Fascinating stuff. Identity, indeed. Personal identity, yes.
But, generally I'm known as someone in the Buddhist recovery field, in the sense that 25 years ago, I poured my last glass of beer. I poured a glass of beer at my home in Newbury in Berkshire. And I poured that beer out, and I said, "Oh, never again. This is my last beer ever, and this is I'm not going to take anything else that will replace what was."
So is that where you're from, Newbury in Berkshire,
No,
or were you just living there at the time?
I was living there at the time. Actually, from Cove in County Cork.
Cove in County Cork, fantastic place.
From the holy ground, yes. And obviously, having spent a long time in England, my accent sort of changed. But being back in Ireland for the last 7 years, my accent's starting to slip back a little bit.
You definitely sound English, though, more than Irish,
Yeah. Although there are some words I say and people pick up and say, "Are you Irish, or do you have any Irish in you?"
So we're in Vietnam.
We're in
Berkshire, via Cove. Do you remember what the beer was that you were pouring?
Frankly, no, I can't.
Interesting.
I can't.
But in your head, you said, "This is it. This is the last one. I'm not doing this
absolutely.
again."
Yeah. I had a cupboard in the house, and it was just full of booze anyway. So it wasn't as if it was the last alcohol in the house.
Yeah.
It was the can of beer that I got out of the fridge, and it was going to be my last one. I'd had enough. Clearly, after 25 years of heavy drinking, it wasn't getting me anywhere. In fact, it was getting me nowhere. My life wasn't getting any better. It was getting worse. I didn't know what the future held, because of my belief system told me, my upbringing, particularly my Irish Catholic upbringing, my relationship with my relations in Ireland and out of Ireland, were very alcohol centered, and so a life without alcohol, either to celebrate or to commiserate for anything, was a pretty scary affair, and I really felt like I was taking a leap into the dark. People who didn't drink or take drugs were strange people. here
Yeah,
I was about to join them.
yeah. And I can identify with that. Growing up in the northwest of England, in Manchester, it didn't matter what the occasion was. If it was a christening, a wedding, a birthday, a funeral, you name it, there was a gathering, there was a social gathering, and there was alcohol involved. And there was people that could handle it, that would just have one or two drinks, get cheery and merry. And there was people that couldn't handle it, and they just turn into an arsehole. And as I got older, I turned into the latter. You know, it didn't do me any favors. I'd start to become quite, you know, losing the inhibitions around being polite or being nice. And so I'd rub people up the wrong way. And like that, again, for the benefit of the audience, you were one of my guest speakers back in 2016 when I launched, did a book launch in Limerick, was it? For The Fox and the Scorpion Meets Cold Turkey. And I quit the fags and I quit the booze. So I can relate in some sense to what you're saying, but I didn't last 25 years, Vince. I lasted 4 months. Now I still don't smoke. So I'm about 2012. Yeah, about 10 years off the fags. But I started drinking again 4 months later after documenting the diary of the cold turkey on both. So I can relate to that venture into the unknown.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, you know, it's none of my business if people, you know, want to drink a bottle of whiskey or take a line of coke or shoot up heroin, smoke crack. None of my business at all. Life's difficult, and we deal with it in whatever way we deal with it.
Coping mechanisms.
You know, yeah, as I've moved around the world between India, Thailand, Vietnam here, America, Ireland, England, you know, people use alcohol and drugs as a coping mechanism, you know, to numb ourselves from the pain and difficulties of the world. And as much as we tell ourselves we're celebrating or we're commiserating, we're just, this moment that we're enjoying now isn't good enough. It has to have something taken away from it or added to it, and that's alcohol or drugs or whatever it is. It's a change at this momentary experience, and you know, people have to deal with life as best as they can, because life is difficult. Life's very stressful. Life's pretty traumatic, you know.
So am I right in saying that as someone that's worked with helping people with addictions through the benefit of your background with the Buddhist teachings, you've come across the work of Dr. Gabor Mate, Canadian, Hungarian, so what do you see? He calls himself a doctor, a physician, but his work on multi-generational family trauma and the underlying causes of addictions is particularly fascinating, and something I've shared with a lot of people, one of his books, and I'm keen to share that information, especially when I meet with psychotherapists. I find it amazing that some of them haven't heard of him. And this kind of ethos that at the core, like, it doesn't matter, as you say, if it's sex, drugs, or chocolate, underlying it is this idea that we're not enough, this idea that we need something to be someone or be something, and we self-medicate through the choice of whatever substance or whatever it is. And he defines addiction as anything which in the short term gives us satisfaction from or alleviation from that need, but in the long term causes detriment to us, either physically, emotionally, spiritually, or what have you. And alcohol certainly falls into that category, having all of us being a young man, having a few drinks, having a great time at a party or something. And then the morning after, you're like, what was I doing? What was I thinking? You know, and unfortunately in my family, it's quite relevant at the moment. My father was an alcoholic and my brother is an alcoholic. And I move between, in and out of it. I think it's not so productive to have labels like that, you know, that they say alcoholics go to meetings and drunks go to parties. But I see it firsthand in my family and in my life, the impacts that addictions and alcoholism has had on beautiful souls, beautiful people that become fucked up as a consequence, maybe because of this multi-generational family trauma, the childhood trauma, what Gabor talks about and what Gabor refers to as, it doesn't necessarily it isn't necessarily a thing that happened, or it's about the trauma itself. It's how we processed the trauma, the internal dialogue, and how we feel about ourselves in the world. Maybe talk a little bit more about that for us.
Well, maybe I'll launch into Philip Larkin's poem, Then This Be the Verse, where Philip Larkin says, "They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with all the faults they had, and they add some extra just for you." But they were fucked up in their turn by men in old-style hats and coats, who half the time were taciturn and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself. So Philip Larkin's
Very
got a
poignant.
handle.
Philip Larkin.
Philip Larkin, and the poem's called This Be the Verse.
Thank you.
Where man hands on misery to man, intentionally or unintentionally. We are influenced by our parents, we're influenced by our cultures and societies, we influence our cultures and societies, and we influence our own children. So this, the philosophical question of is there free will, might arise because we're conditioned from so many different angles that am I genuinely making a free will choice? Are there all these influences that I can't understand that are actually inclining me towards picking up another beer or whatever it might be, or or picking up the 9th beer, or on many occasions the 18th beer. So I'd like to blend the modern neuroscience and modern psychology, evolutionary psychology, with the ancient Buddhist psychology, and the Buddha said, first and foremost, life's difficult. So, nowadays psychologists, neuroscientists would say, well, we're not actually meant to be happy. It's not a state we're meant to have. Yet underlying it, we're always chasing happiness. We're always changing this moment, making this moment better. We're not intended to be happy. We're intended to keep going round on that hamster wheel, looking for more food, more mates, more safety, more security.
Something better.
Even though we've got those things, and even that those things are delusions in themselves. There is no safety.
Therefore, in accepting that, isn't gratitude therefore at the core of sanity? If you're grateful for what you have, if you accept that one day you won't be able to breathe anymore, and you were just full of gratitude for every breath that you have, and make it a nice big deep breath and just be hugely grateful. We can be that, and we can do that, but then we soon forget, don't we? Or we get distracted by something, or the nature of the mind is such that we maybe lose the focus on the gratitude.
We're designed to forget, and to keep grasping, to keep going round on that hamster wheel of evolution. One of the Buddha's, my favorite definition of mindfulness is, the Buddha says, what is mindfulness? It's to remember what was said and done long ago. So not to forget, to remember. So this constant remembering each and every breath, each and every step. I can't be happy tomorrow, Carl. It's impossible. I can only be happy sitting here, clothes sticking to me, being a blood donor for mosquitoes, and I can only be happy in this moment. It is.
So, just an interesting point there, right? In say the philosophical circles, if you sort of go into the meaning of life, and you go into the pursuit of happiness as one of the explanations defined as the meaning of life, the Greeks used to have a term which was coined by, I think it was Aristotle, called eudaimonia, which was not happiness in the sense of the feeling you get when you've had a few beers or a bottle of wine and you're feeling sort of merry or happy, or not necessarily the feeling. Say if you watch your child win a race in the school fun and games or what have you, that what they mean by eudaimonia is a sense of well-being. So if there's a bereavement in the family, or if somebody close to you has passed on, you can't be happy. It's a general feeling of well-being, which is to some degree predicated on outside and external factors and external influences. This idea that happiness is an inside job, that you take care of your own well-being, you mind your own mind, and you realize how volatile and delicate that balance is. Maybe the meaning of life isn't necessarily the pursuit of happiness. Maybe the pursuit of happiness just wants us to pursue happiness even more. And like you say, we end up in this wandering cycle of what the Buddhists call samsara, of endless suffering. But my missus points out that the Buddhists, that it's a bit depressing if it's all about suffering. So there has to be some alleviation from just the focus being on the alleviation of suffering, right? So there has to be some meaning or something positive or something connected to the pursuit of happiness, but not happiness from a bottle or a cigar, but from a sense of well-being that maybe you've cultivated over time through self-respect, self-love, self-awareness. And when I sit and meditate with the Buddhist monks, as you know from being at Sunyata for a few years, none of them seem depressed or unhappy or like they're suffering. They mostly seem quite content with themselves and who they are and where they're at.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We have to come to terms with that first realization, the Buddha's first realization: life's tough. So we have to surrender to that. Life is tough. It's short, it's hard, it's traumatic, it's stressful, birth, sickness, old age, and death. So we have to surrender to that fact. And so anything we do to try and get round that ain't going to work, because that's the basis of life. Life is hard. And we tend to make it harder for ourselves. And then he says, on top of that, we have all these inclinations. We have these compulsions for sex, sugar, novelty, excitement.
Now, is that discernment or is that just preference from experience?
No, they're inbuilt inclinations. That's what gets us to mate.
So
that's what
evolutionary biology dictates for the vast majority of us, if we're male, we seek a mate, a female, and if we're female, we seek a mate, a male. That's inbuilt. That's a mechanism that we cannot.
Yeah, those inclinations are inbuilt. The craving for excitement, for novelty, the craving for relationships.
Variety?
For sensual pleasure. Variety comes in there. The Buddha keeps it much more succinct. He just says, the craving for sensual pleasures, which covers an awful lot of area. And then we're also inclined, we're compelled, to secure this sense of self, to become, to be seen, to be heard, to have status. And again, that relates then to how much pleasure we can.
Fascinating.
We can get.
So we're going to loop back into identity, right? I'm just going to whip through a few quick fire questions for you before we do.
Sure.
Have you ever written a book?
Not a real book, no. I've written.
What do you mean, not a real book?
Not a real. No. I aspire one day to write a real book, and I've written some short pieces, and I've written a little Hungry Ghost booklet that's freely available to download. But I haven't really written anything, and what I have written is several years old. I do need, need shouldn't come into it. I would like to, if time permitted and circumstances permitted, to put some thoughts down on a bit of paper. I don't know who they'd be for in particular.
Interesting. I know a fellow with a startup company called The Right Coach that helps people guide them through the process of writing books based on his experience as a published author, having written 5 books and published 3. I'll ask him if he can get in touch with you and have a word, will I?
Now, I have famous authors as friends who offer to oversee and to encourage and to help guide me.
Are you allowed to name any names?
No, I'm not going to. No, but which they wouldn't normally do. But I've yet to take them up on that offer. So for now, the short answer is no. I haven't written anything.
Have you ever driven a Ferrari?
No.
Have you ever ridden a horse?
So long ago, I can't remember. Yeah.
Have you ever jumped out of a plane?
Not yet.
Have you ever cheated death?
Oh, numerous occasions. Too many to mention.
Have you children?
Two adult sons and a 2-year-old granddaughter.
Lovely. Have you ever eaten an insect?
Yes, I've travelled in Asia. Yes, I've eaten all sorts of things. Yeah.
Have you ever walked on hot coals?
No.
Have you ever done public speaking?
Yes.
Have you ever been abducted by aliens?
Only by a dodgy taxi driver in Delhi. Yeah, but no. Other than that, no.
And what was your best holiday?
Oh, that's a very difficult question because I don't, as such, I wouldn't describe myself as a tourist, or clearly I am to a degree.
You're a well-travelled man, Vince.
I've been very fortunate to move around, and people invite me to teach in various places. But I'd like to think I'm more a traveller more than a tourist. So the best holidays, I don't know. I've had the opportunity to snorkel a couple of times here in Vietnam, and I just kept thinking back to Indonesia. There's a couple of islands off of Bali, the Gillies. That's very small islands, and the snorkeling is just wonderful. And snorkeling is a meditation. I'm not a great swimmer. In fact, I'm a very poor swimmer. And here I am launching myself into water, face down with just a tube hanging out my mouth, trying to overcome my fear of swimming. I've been swept out to sea, and it's the deepest ocean trench in the world, or one of the deepest ocean trenches in the world. And yet I can just stop and breathe in, breathe out, breathe in and breathe, and be perfectly still. And I find that the stiller I am when I'm snorkeling, just breathing in and out, the more I see, the more that becomes clear, very much like being on a meditation cushion. So the things that you couldn't see, that were fuzzy, that were camouflaged in the rocks and in the corals, suddenly become clear and become very distinct. And occasionally, a turtle might pop out, and you find yourself swimming with turtles, which is a rather wonderful experience.
I like the analogy of the mind as well. When you have a meditation practice, the mind can be still and clear, and you can see things much better.
But you've got to stop thrashing around. Yeah, you've got to be really still.
Now, having said that, I found snorkeling quite traumatic myself. I was on holiday in Turkey, and this girl took me down at midday, and the current was so strong it was knocking me off my feet. And I was like, nah, man, this is not pleasurable in any sense, you know? So I have a great admiration for snorkelers and how they can do that, you know.
Yeah, so that's the long answer to a short question. I'm sorry.
No, that was pretty much. I was going to come into sort of what's your favorite song, what's the best book you've ever read, and why. Just to give the viewers an insight into your personality, really. The best holiday we kind of touched on, the best trip abroad and why, and then we'll loop back into identity. As a habit, I tend to ask any of the guests, what's your favorite book and why? But not just one, pick two or three. If don't just feel restricted to one. Is there any books that stand out for you that changed your life in any way?
Well, a lot of the Buddhist texts have had a huge impact on me. As much as I don't.
The Dhammapada.
Dhammapada is a lovely collection, but some of the other stuff as well. Some of the really early Pali texts. A collection called Atthakavada. They're quite stunning.
Spell that.
More Atthakavada. Oh, Atthakavada. Atthakavada. I'm trying to think of the English name of it now. The collection of eights, I think it's called. Yeah, I can't. I think it's a collection of eights because the verses are in eight parts. And,
interesting, yeah.
So yeah, certainly Buddhist scriptures have had a big impact, both Pali and modern writers that investigating Buddhist scripture. In fact, at the end of our conversation, I've got a Buddhist study group that I'm part of that meet on a 3-weekly basis to discuss Buddhist topics. But the other books that have recently really been very helpful are both of Lisa Feldman Barrett's books. Her first book, How Emotions Are Made: The Secret Life of the Brain, where she comes to the conclusion that there's only two types of emotion. There's pleasant and unpleasant. And
How Emotions Are Made by Lisa which?
Lisa Feldman Barrett.
Feldman Barrett.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's always interesting to learn new names. I haven't come across this before.
Her conclusion after years and years of her own studies and reviewing other people's studies that, basically something's pleasant or unpleasant and everything else gets built upon that, which is very much a Buddhist notion. This notion of Vedana, that we find things pleasant or unpleasant or neither. So that's very Buddhist. So her insights into how emotions are made are very, very helpful.
But typically, I was just going to say, typically emotions are like anger, frustration, happy, sad, lonely, excited. They're all built on pleasant or unpleasant, is what she's saying.
That's it, yeah. Yeah, which is a very much a Buddhist concept. What we contact, we perceive to be pleasant or unpleasant, and then we add all sorts of constructions onto that. That's a very Buddhist notion, but it's modern neuroscience.
Were you always drawn to Buddhist philosophy?
Once I got sober, yeah.
So not before. What age were you when you had your last beer, Vince?
39.
It's a good number.
Yeah, my one regret about getting sober is I didn't do it 20 years earlier. Because I spent 25 years drinking like a fish, and I've now spent 25, getting off 26 years not drinking at all. And 25 years of drinking, living in a haze, a world centered, revolving around alcohol and things and people to do with alcohol. It's a life, it's a life lost. 25 years lost. I know that technically all of those years, all of those moments have also gone into the creation of who I am, that
Correct.
identity of who I am today.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I wish it didn't take 25 years. I wish I could have got. So if I were to express a preference, my preference would be to have got sober earlier.
Well, let me reframe that for you. Let me reframe that for you then. So rather than regretting that it took you 25 years in this lifetime, maybe it's better that than it took you 25 lifetimes.
Perhaps.
Imagine 25 lifetimes to kick the booze, and then maybe you'd say, well, that's better than 50 lifetimes.
Oh, indeed. You know, my Buddhist inclinations now are very much from a secular basis, very much from the point of view that this is my one and only life. You know, when I take my last breath, that will be my last breath. The world will continue, but I won't be in it, and I won't be coming back either, in any shape or form.
So you wouldn't ascribe or subscribe to the notion that you are like a disembodied consciousness or a soul or a vital life force energy that transmutes incarnations?
No.
Interesting.
Doesn't do anything for me at all.
I think that's fairly self-evident, by the way. I think that's pretty obvious that that's the case, but that's just my opinion, you know.
We all, you know, my world is made up of sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, and experience, and I put them all together. And well, I don't put them together. My brain does, and my brain presents this hallucination around me. This is your world. And everyone else's brain does the same thing for them. And sometimes when we have a shared hallucinations, we call that reality. And some hallucinations, sometimes I see the world the same as you see the world. And sometimes I don't, but for whatever reasons. But in terms of I wouldn't say I'm religious. I wouldn't say I'm spiritual. I'd say I have an inclination towards Buddhist philosophy, but I also have an inclination towards modern neuroscience and psychologies.
It's interesting, isn't it, in some ways, that modern neuroscience is actually catching up with some of the knowledge in the ancient texts, right? And some of the knowledge that was contained in Atlantis was supposedly brought through to ancient Egypt, which was then brought through to the Greeks and maybe the Romans and beyond. There would be teachings there that science is actually catching up with and affirming now. But that can be another conversation for another time.
I think so. Yeah. So one of the compulsions we have, one of the inclinations we have that leads to suffering, is this desire for continued existence, this desire to live forever. So even
as a particular incarnation or as an ego, like there's no more Vince Cullen or Carl Ashley after this life, right? But what I'm referring to as a disembodied consciousness, your soul personality, what makes you goes beyond. There's some sort of identity in who you are and what you are that survives bodily death and can be recognized in those incarnations. So you're saying that's a construct created by the need for there to be identity beyond this life, should we say?
Yeah, people don't want to die. People don't want to think, well, this is it. How many tombs have I seen in the last 3 weeks? These tombs to the ancestors, and people doing things because they want to guarantee a good rebirth. Or I was recently doing a study retreat based in a convent in London, staffed by these wonderful Irish nuns, and they couldn't get their head around that I don't believe in heaven or hell. I don't believe in a life after this one. Well, I don't need to. I don't. I do good in this life. I'll try to do good. I try not to hurt anyone in this life, because that's the right thing to do, not for any perceived reward or punishment, it's some other time place. I want to do it because it's the right thing to do. And that's the core of Buddhist practice, as far as I can see, is breaking down this ego, breaking down the self, so that we get to the point of, we're practicing not to get ahead, but to get along.
I like that emphasis on practical Buddhism, but I also like the intellectual aspect of Buddhist philosophy as well. And this idea that you have these innumerable past lives that you don't remember unless you can have some conscious recollection of them, and hence dreams, or there's some kind of cosmic consciousness that we can tune into. And there's like this super highway of cosmic consciousness, and we can hop on and hop off. I like those more kind of mystical concepts in addition to the practical wisdom of Buddhism. Yeah.
Whatever keeps you on the path.
But that core of harmlessness, that idea of not wanting to do harm to any other being, whether it's an insect or a human, I've always felt that ever since I was a child. I wouldn't say that's necessarily Buddhist, to be honest. I'd say that transcends religion or spirituality. And I think a lot of people are like that. Or maybe it's not so many people that are like that. I don't know.
It's common sense. 2,600 years ago, the Buddha said, look, he said, it's not a good idea to go around killing people. He said, it's not a good idea to go around taking anything that doesn't belong to you. He said, it's not a good idea, not to be sexually responsible, to be sexually promiscuous. It's not a good idea. It's not a good idea to go around telling lies or speaking harsh to people. And he said, it's not a good idea to drink.
And when they asked why, he said, because...
2,600 years ago, he said, because this is ancient, this is traditional, this is unadulterated, it's been unadulterated from the beginning, and no sensible person can argue with these suggestions. So already, 2,600 years ago, this is just common sense.
Well, was that not because of the karmic consequences you're bringing on yourself?
No, not at all. It's how do you have peaceful communities? I have the right not to be punched. I have the right for my stuff to be respected. I have a right for my physical body to be, my space to be respected. I have a right to be spoken to kindly and truthfully. And I've got a right to clear and clear mind.
But you know that there are other people in the world that don't feel the same way.
That's right. And that's where this difference comes from. We have this need to either get along or to get ahead. And inbuilt in us generally is I must get ahead. I must survive at any cost. And it's the big I, the ego I must survive at any cost. Me, my family, my tribe, my nation must survive at any cost.
And is that an inbuilt mechanism as well, would you contend?
Absolutely. Yeah. And of course, that's why Neanderthal man apparently died out, because he couldn't actually collaborate.
And not that the aliens came and gene spliced him with themselves to make us.
No, I don't quite. I think he just couldn't collaborate. So when there was a need, when collaboration would have progressed Neanderthal culture or Neanderthal beings, they couldn't do it. They were so strong in this protecting their family units. And it was the Homo sapiens who and other variations that collaborated and moved into hunter-gathering and what have you, where you need a degree of collaboration. So that's where you get this balance between getting ahead at any cost, or what the Buddhist scriptures try to teach us, to get along at any cost. It's to get along. I think it's fairly
evident that cooperation trumps competition.
But in the world, people want competition. What's Putin doing in Ukraine?
Oh, not getting into that. I don't follow the mainstream narrative at all.
But he's asserting an identity. He's asserting getting ahead. He's asserting.
I've never met him.
This
I
is
don't
what
know.
you only have to read his interviews in the newspaper. He just told the Russian people this will be good for Russian people. So he's playing on safety, security, certainty, these inbuilt needs. So when we collaborate, we have to let go. We have to loosen our need for safety, security.
Before we look back into the personal identity, right? Aside from the Dhammapada and the Atthakavada and the Lisa Feldman, any favorite movies or movies that have changed your life that come to mind that you'd like to share with us?
Nothing immediately jumps. I've been to the pictures for ages, although I did watch the latest Matrix movie. Excuse me. I watched the latest Matrix movie, which I didn't make a lot of sense of.
Is that the Matrix 4?
Matrix 4, yeah. But if we go back to the Matrix 1, where he's asked to take, the red pill or the blue pill, and this is very reminiscent of waking up to how life really is. So for me, getting to this point, well, Vince, this is your one and only life, and you can live it sober, or you can live it drunk. You can experience, all the sights, all the sounds, all the smells, all the tastes, all the experiences as they
Which
really
pill did you
are.
take, Vince?
Whichever one is the one that keeps you out of the dream machine. Yeah. Now you said about attaining these higher states and what have you, and it's a hard task to progress. But the Buddha's third realization was, we can have contentedness, not happiness, but contentedness. There are moments where I need nothing in my life. I'm not asking for anything. There are moments in my life where there's nothing I need to get rid of. And then moments in my life when I'm not confused, or I don't think I'm confused anyway. So when those three things are present, there's no craving, there's no aversion, there's no confusion. That's a moment of nirvana. Nirvana isn't some place I get to. Nirvana is something I practice in the here and now, moment to moment.
I like that idea, and I've been there. I've been in very deep states of meditation where I became aware I didn't need to piss, I didn't need to shit, I didn't need to eat, I didn't need to drink, I didn't need to sleep, I didn't need to be somebody. Everything was just fucking cushy, man. It was like there was this deep, really deep sense of underlying peace at which I was one with. And I wouldn't say every meditation ever since has been a disappointment. But it could be a bit like chasing the dragon, trying to get back there. But this sense of not needing anything and just not having any desire for anything, but just being completely in this state of serene gratitude and peacefulness was just incredible. And of course, transitory,
Absolutely. But can you do that standing in the queue, waiting to get on a Ryanair flight?
And that's where I like the Wayne Dyer stuff, where he talks about from piss to bliss. Talking of books that changed your life, one of my spiritual teachers, Sister Gino, who you're probably aware of and know from Sunyata, she gave me a book called The Power of Intention by Wayne Dyer. And aside from crashing my car into a ditch and a few other things that changed my life, that was one such book that changed my life. And the teachings there, where he talks about those practical things that you can do to slip back into a state of gratitude when you're losing your shit, whether someone's cutting you up in traffic or somebody's making you wait in a queue. Those are practical things. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Well, it's not. Why practice? I don't want to spend the rest of my life sitting on the cushion. I want to spend the rest of my life doing things that make me feel alive. And if that means standing in the queue, a Ryanair queue, and not being upset by it, and being quite content with it, then that's the practice, And the more of those moments that I can string together, the more I experience that contentedness. So it's remembering to see those things. That's third realization. The Buddha says, anyone can do it. Anyone can experience the absence of greed, the absence of aversion, the absence of confusion. Anyone can verify it. And if you've ever given up, a serious addiction, as many of us have, then we experience that on a daily basis. Every day I have freedom from craving, freedom from aversion, freedom from the confusion of addiction. Every single day. I've just got to remember that. That's where this mindfulness comes in, to remember, to be grateful.
So the remembering or the recollection, that ties in with personal identity, right?
But only
We
in the sense
remember
that,
who we are and what we are.
no, not at all, really. Well, only that I'm an ever-changing, narrative. That's all I am. There's a lovely free book on the internet called Forgiveness for Everyone by an ex-monk called Jeff Oliver, and it's freely available to download. And he goes through the process of forgiveness, but he's got this ongoing refrain that he sort of varies throughout the book, and it's something along the lines of, "That's who I was yesterday, not who I am today, not who I will be tomorrow." Now, I've taught in prisons, male prisons and female prisons in the UK, and to present that to a prisoner, that this idea of, that's who I was then, it's not who I am now, it's not who I will be in the future. I'm a constantly changing. I'm a work in progress.
Forgiveness for Everyone by
Jeff Oliver.
Jeff Oliver, thank you.
And there's also a forgiveness workbook on one of my websites, and you can look that up on the internet, just the forgiveness workbook. So this idea that we're constantly changing.
Yeah, so for anyone that wants to get in touch with you, where can they find you? You mentioned the website there. Tell us how to get in touch.
There's two websites. There's the Fifth Precept website, which is a sort of recovery support sangha, a recovery support fellowship, to a degree, but it's about a fellowship of just people who want to live harmlessly, which obviously includes not indulging in any form of addiction. That's one website, the Fifth Precept website. So that's 5th-precept.org. And then the other website, and probably a bit easier to remember, is the Hungry Ghost Retreats. And if you look up Hungry Ghost Retreats, there's all my contact details there. There's loads of links to videos and recordings and podcasts, and there's some series of YouTube.
I'm conscious of the time and the fact that you need to shoot off in a minute, so I don't want to keep you. Although I would mention, I feel very much like I've been on a journey where I was that hungry ghost, that young man that needed to get pissed, needed to get stoned, needed to chase girls, needed to get something from people. And eventually I've kind of come around to being someone who meditates with crystals and wants to be of service to others as of more importance than service to self, of course, without putting myself down, and maintaining self-love and self-care and self-esteem in order to be of service to others. And that journey's been an interesting one, and it's great to hear that you're committed to helping people and traveling the world, and doing and practicing in a very real sense, helping people recover from addictions and what have you, and practicing harmlessness. That's a very humanitarian thing. So kudos to you, man.
Thank you. I'm just very lucky to be able to do what I do. I'm very, very grateful. You've pretty much described, Carl, that shift from getting ahead to getting along. And when you look out the window, when you go to the supermarket or even to a football game or whatever, just bear that in mind. Who here is trying to get ahead based on survival at any cost, and who here is getting along? And it's a fundamental characteristic of life when you look out there, and from the beggars out there who really are just wanting to survive, needing to survive at any cost, to the con artists who will rob you blind, and just buy another gold ring for their finger. That there is a need to survive. We all have to survive, but we can do that harmlessly.
Very good. So Vince Cullen from Hungry Ghost Retreats and fifthprecept.org. Thanks for joining us on Menscape, the podcast. This will go out in June 2022. And I wish you safe travels on your continued voyages between Vietnam and Thailand. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Good luck. And and we'll speak again soon.
Menscape, the podcast with Carl.J. Ashley.